Cheryl for speaking up because I wasn't
Yeah,
aware that that was going to happen. And so knowing ahead of time would have been helpful, but thank you for saying that.
yeah. And thank you for that. I had worked with the other officers on a protocol which I had failed to publish, so I sent out a last-minute email about this. But that's why I wanted to spend some time at the beginning of this to make sure everyone was aware. So, yeah, thank you for your patience and consideration.
Absolutely. And you look
Okay.
fabulous, Karen, so it'll be fine.
All right. Great. So here's an overview of our meeting. I'll do a welcome in a bit. We'll do, I don't know, we have quite a few people. I'm not sure we'll do introductions because we want to get right into the meeting, but maybe we'll just introduce some of the officers of the club, ask if there's any brief announcements. I'll do a very brief announcement about the Alameda County Democratic Central Committee, and then we'll get right into the panel. So I'm going to stop sharing right now and go ahead and give my little standard blurb for the beginning of the meeting. So thank you all for coming to the meeting tonight. We are glad to have you and welcome you to join our mailing list or to join as a dues paying member. If you go to our website and go to the membership page, you can sign up for our mailing list there. If you continue to, and you just need to give your name and email address there. If you continue to click through and pay and become a dues paying member, you can enjoy all the benefits of membership, such as knowing you're supporting this all volunteer organization and being able to vote on club matters such as endorsement, bylaw changes. And you can get and if you're on the mailing list, you get the Zoom link directly into your email. So many advantages to being on our mailing list and becoming a paying member. So please consider that. Okay. So getting back to the, Colette says she also has to leave before too long. So I'm going to skip over introductions, except to say that I'm Nick Pilch. I'm the president of the club. Other officers of the club we have with us tonight are Gabi Beatty and Brian Martin. Gabi's our secretary. Brian Martin's a officer at large.
I'm actually treasurer, and I will, on that note, I will just jump in and say that July is the month, according to our bylaws, that dues are due. So if you haven't re-upped recently, you will see an email from the club soon. Thank you.
Okay. And then we have Aaron Tiedemann, who's one of our officers as well. And we have a few panelists here, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves in a moment.
Nick, we also have a number of electeds, if you would.
Yeah, recognizing the electeds, I see we have Mayor Janelle Gary in the house in the meeting. Thank you, Mayor, for being here, and we have Councilmember Peggy McQuaid as well. And Aaron also is on the city council.
We also have trustee. We also have Trustee Boyd from the school board.
Thank you.
And there may be other people. Who I don't. Of course, City Council Member Tiedemann as well.
Yeah, I mentioned Aaron. Yeah. Okay.
And if we missed anybody, let us know.
Yep. Okay. Very good. Any quick announcements from anyone about Democratic Club matters before we get much further? Any quick announcements?
Yes.
Yep. Go ahead, please.
Congress finally did something right in passing the first holiday in 80 years, and that we will finally have Juneteenth as a national holiday once the president signs it. So we cannot fail to at least recognize that right now. So I just want to make sure we say that. They finally did something right. It's not enough. It's on the road to having some since this is the topic for tonight, I do want to make sure we at least recognize that in this forum. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Cheryl.
you. Yeah, that's huge. And in fact, I almost forgot to say that tonight because I did put that in my publicity that I sent out today on Facebook and in the that not only do we recognize Juneteenth as a national holiday, we're having a Juneteenth celebration on Saturday, and that's at why am I forgetting the name? It's at the Masonic and Solano, the arts store. They'll be celebrating Juneteenth all day there, and Abrams Claghorn art gallery. And we just had a meeting on Tuesday of the community task force on policing, and that was their second meeting. And so if people don't know that we're doing that, also Lizzie Cajun's Cafe is in the Juneteenth celebration. So if people don't know if we're doing this, that we're doing this community task force on policing, which also has to do with racism, they should go to the city's website and maybe sign up for notifications about that. So yeah, it's quite a Juneteenth week, and so I'm very happy about that. Any other quick announcements?
Our own city passed something on that last month for honoring Juneteenth, and so that's also was great to see last month, and now at the national level. It's great.
Yeah, it seems like the national might just go ahead and trump what the city did, but I'm glad that the city got ahead of that. You're right. Thank you. So moving on, Alameda County Democratic Central Committee, nothing really to report after the last meeting, which was quite substantial. Most of the meeting before the last meeting, which is quite substantial. This past meeting was mostly just housekeeping, so nothing to report. Okay, let me get right into it since Colette has limited time and one of our panelists. So we wanted to go ahead and have a number of forums at the Albany Democratic Club on racial equity or racial inequity and racism in Albany because our membership had told us that that was one of their top two priorities, is racial equity and housing. So this will be the first and hopefully by no means the last forum on this. We decided we would try to get some of the representatives from the parent groups to talk tonight. We did reach out to Familias Latinas, to the AAPI parent group, to the Black Parent Engagement Group, and to the Jewish Parent Engagement Group. And sorry if I'm getting these names slightly incorrect. You can correct me in a moment. But we were able to get a representative, Colette West, who's vice president of the Black Parent Advisory Group. And then we have Karen Zapata and Yvette Leung, and please correct my pronunciation later of your name, of the organization Albany Speaks Out. And finally, we have Elizabeth Branoff of the Jewish Parents Engagement Group, who will be our panelists tonight. So without further ado, let's just launch into it, and let's go ahead and give Colette the first chance to introduce herself and talk about what her group is doing in town around racial equity, inequity, and racism.
Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge Mayor Gary being on the call as well, and several members of the Black Parent Advisory Group. Stephen Walker, thank you for joining, and of course, Cheryl. My name is Colette West. I have two kids in the Albany Unified School District. My kids have been in the Albany Unified School District since TKK. I have one in high school, junior, will be a junior next year, and I have a 7th grader at Albany Middle School. And as far as what our group is doing to dismantle the systemic institutionalized racism that exists in our communities in our community, is that we're really just giving a voice and a presence to this problem, right? Like acknowledging that in order for us to dismantle these institutions, that we have to be the voice and we need to highlight it. And then with that being said, also through the process of education, educating folks, and just promoting a togetherness, promoting a community of Black people and allies for Black folks. So, so that's been my experience and my viewpoint of how I'm seeing the work being done by Black Parent Advisory Group, mostly focused on Albany Unified School District. So our work is really focused there, but also with Mayor Gary, we've also are planning, we've participated in the planning of the Juneteenth, which is one of the very first Juneteenths that will be taking place in Albany. Also, we promote education through being visible and making sure that we honor our Black students at promotions in middle school and in high school. So I just want to make it clear, like, I'm one voice. And, you know, the Black voice is varied. We're very different. We have different backgrounds. We have different ideas. So really, rather than just representing Black Parent Advisory Group, I'm also representing myself. And I want, for me personally, highlighting the housing issues in Albany. I think that there needs to be a concerted effort to do some more investigation as to why there aren't more Black families in Albany. And it could be, you know, I saw the issue on redlining. In addition to that, rental properties. How in line are our rental residential dwellings, how aligned are they in the equity that we are trying to promote in Albany? So it's my charge for the group is we need to do some investigation. I mean, we need to find out, is there a problem? Is there a situation where folks are getting blocked out because of their race, how they present? So that's one of the things I would like to highlight in this conversation.
Okay, great, thank you. And let's move on to Karen Zapata and Yvette Leung, who are here to represent Albany Speaks. If you could just give a real brief introduction to your group, either one of you, and so that we can get to the questions as soon as we can. But go ahead, please, Karen and or Yvette.
Yeah, hi, my name is Karen Zapata, and I want to start by recognizing that this land, the Albany land, is Lijon Ohlone territory, and the Lijon Ohlone people have been taking care of and stewarding this land for hundreds of generations and thousands of years. So I want to start by expressing gratitude and appreciation for the Ohlone people, because our well-being is tied to their stewardship of that land. And also to recognize that Ohlone people and many other Native communities are alive and practicing their traditions and culture right now here in the Bay Area and on this land. So, so my name is Karen Zapata. I was born and raised in Albany, in the city of Albany. And as a mixed race Latina, I grew up in this community, seeing a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight. And I moved back here recently and have been starting to do some organizing work. And Yvette and can talk more about that. But our work in the city of Albany is to do organizing around racial equity, around questions of building an agenda for racial justice in this city. And so a lot of us I think there are a lot of organizers in Albany that don't necessarily, perhaps in the past, see the city as a place to do organizing. And that's what we're hoping to engage in Albany. I'm outside of this, I'm a teacher at Berkeley High School as well. And yeah, Yvette.
Great, and I put in the chat, I apologize, but my Wi-Fi is unstable, so I think it's best for me to not have my video on. So I'm a resident of Albany since 2001. Moved here because of Smallbany, like the quaintness of the city, the school district. And what I want to say is that as it relates to our group, Albany Speaks Out, we just started meeting maybe 3 meetings ago, but we're a loose collaborative of individuals and groups concerned with the issue of racial justice and also tired of the silence, and in that silence, the complicity. And while we've only had 3 meetings, our group has grown to about 40 people. And so I think that Karen and I, we met in July of 2020. It seems like there's a lot of us who share those concerns, and we're happy to be here. Thank you.
Navigate to the mute button. Thank you for that. And then finally, we have Elizabeth Branoff, who's here as a representative of the Jewish Parents Engagement Group. Did I get that name right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. And like Colette, I represent myself and just one member of the Jewish Parent, in this case, engagement group. And I don't represent, everybody, and just my voice. But I would say, so our group started around the time that there were anti-Black incidents at the high school, Albany High School. And we really wanted to be allies with fighting the terrible things that happened at the high school. And through, I think there are a number of activities that happened after that where we really promoted allyship and really getting our community's participation in some of the meetings that were happening on that issue, and strengthening Albany as an equitable place in general. So that was, I think, how we got started. And then there were some additional anti-Semitic incidents at the high school that we started also speaking up against as well. I think, it's interesting because, as there are definitely Jews of color, and there's a whole, way in which we're struggling within our own community to make sure that Jews of color are treated equitably. But I would say, more so Jews are seen as the privileged white community, and that we are very complicit. And I think we're doing a lot of internal education around white privilege and the role that we play in systems that are, oppressive as well. So kind of self-educating and trying to educate our community. I think after in the last election, not this, the Trump administration, there were a rise in anti-hate incidents all over the country, anti-Latino, in El Paso, an incident there against the Sikh community, the Black community in Charleston, and then Jews in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. So there's a thread of anti-racism, anti-Semitism that's really, I think, part of the white nationalist agenda. And I think that's just something that we, on a global, really, just looking at the United States, I think there's a role that Jews and people of color can play together to think about the rise in white nationalism and their goal, and how democracy and more participation and more transparency and allyship and speaking up, that together we can try to improve not only our local community, but maybe have an impact on the national scene as well.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, well, thank you for introducing yourselves and giving a brief introduction. I'm going to launch right in, and in fact, one of the things that was already mentioned that I wanted to touch on was redlining. Maybe others can explain it a bit more, but I'll just say as simply as possible, redlining was a government-sanctioned way that certain geographical areas were designated as better for white people to live in, essentially, and that we designated other areas for those other people to go to. And it's a terrible historic practice, but we see that it has an effect on the current, racial makeup of our cities. So we had redlining in Albany as well as the surrounding communities. The John Birch Society was an ultra-right organization that had its headquarters at one time in Albany. And I'm going to put in the chat a website to a great project that was done at the Bulb by some UC students that talks about many things, but it talks about the public housing at UC Village. And that was the first time that I learned that the original housing at UC Village, well, I knew that the original housing at UC Village was built as a wartime effort to house people to work in the shipyards. But that after the wars, that became a more racially segregated place. And there was white flight and it became more Black people living there. And both Albany and Berkeley had a hand in saying that they didn't like that. And it wasn't quite clear to me in the presentation, but perhaps that was the impetus for UC to take over and make it student housing. Anyway, so Albany's got its own unique history. What I want to ask, and I'll ask Colette to speak to this first, and she has to go, is do you think Albany is unique in our in what's happening racially? Do you think that the past is weighing more or less heavily on Albany?
Well, I can only speak towards my experience in trying to find a rental in Albany. Having applied, of course, there is somewhat of a high demand, and obviously that's used to the advantage of the property owners. But went through a process where it was favorable, very favorable, until having had to meet the person, because a lot of things are like applications, phone calls, but then having to meet the person and finding out at that time that there was nothing available. Now, I would just say like, oh, that was just my story. But having talked to several other people about the competitiveness of the rental market in Albany, my story wasn't unique. So I'm not like, what I'm requesting is that, there are organizations that have concerted efforts into just researching it. You know what I mean? Asking a question and actually not just having dialogue, but is this a case, is this not, right? So in these type of cases, there's Sentinel Housing Organization where they'll, have a couple show up and they'll have a, that's maybe interracial or maybe Black, and they'll see their experience versus, say, a white cisgender family, right? Because this can happen even with people that have families. So this is not unique, to a racial, to someone with a racial background. So I'm just saying, like, we talk a lot, we do a lot of dialoguing about race issues, but then when it comes to finding out, like, is it true, is it not? I think that's where we stop ourselves. So I would love us to look more into that, considering I didn't know the history, which, sometimes these histories tend to repeat themselves. So I'll yield to anyone in the Black Parent Advisory Group that's on the call that would like to speak to the issue.
Any one of the other panelists want to talk about the uniqueness of Albany?
Unless, I just want to make sure that Colette, your group had time. Yeah. You feel like it's okay to move on?
Cheryl has her hand up.
Okay.
So.
Oh, I did not notice that. I can't see Cheryl. There she is. Cheryl, we were going to go through a group of questions that I'd already prepared and then go to audience questions later. But since Colette has to go, do you have a specific question for Colette?
It's not a question. I was responding to what she was asking for the Black Parent Group, but He's fine.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, there's a bunch of us on here who are part of BPAG. So,
Got it.
yeah, just to respond to that, I don't think Albany is necessarily unique, but the uniqueness of Albany is because it is small and it has this habit of touting its liberalness when in fact that's not what it is, right? It's a surface liberalness and it's perfunctory. It has this perfunctory type of we're liberal because we do this, but in fact it is not. It's very surface. And what Colette was alluding to is something that has been on the underpinnings of Albany, right? Yes, we have property in Albany, and I live in El Sobrante most of the time. But my husband grew up right here. He went to school here, grew up between Berkeley and Albany. And his father lived right there at the top of Kensington. So this is not a new thing. And I think that what most people in Albany do is convince themselves that they're these very good liberal people, very progressive people. And because they're not seeing it, or they know this nice Black family, this nice Latino family that lives next door to them, that it must be all great. But that is the worst kind of person, because it's not anti-racism. It's the pat myself on the back because I did a good thing, rather than pass policies and procedures to tear down the systems that are benefiting you as a person who is not Black, Latino, Indigenous, or a person in a community of concern. So that is what she's talking about. And that is where many of these groups got started, is because of all the things our children faced. My daughter was in that group. My son was at the tail end of that group, at that high school that has still not been reckoned with. That is what she's talking about. So no, Albany is not unique, but it is unique because of the special position it is in, stuck in the middle between Richmond and Berkeley, in trying to do things, but not quite getting there. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's see, did anyone else from the Black Parents Group or panelists want to respond?
Unless there's someone from the Black Parent Group.
Can you hear me?
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
Yes, Stephen, we hear you.
Okay, my name is Stephen Walker. I'm part of the Black Parent Group. And I just wanted to kind of echo what Cheryl said. And I can actually speak to like very specific incidents that have happened here in Albany in which, you know, racial epithets have been thrown at me literally on Solano Avenue. Sometime after moving in, one of the families put up basically one of those signs saying, you know, the education system being structured such that Blacks were getting access to things was unfair to white people, and they put up a sign in their yard. So, you know, it happens here too, and I would say the same thing that Cheryl just said, which was there was a lot of people saying that's wrong, but nobody actually took any action.
Okay, thank you. Karen?
Yeah, I apologize, Stephen. I definitely want to make sure that I'm not inserting my voice when the Black Parent Group is speaking. So I want to step back for a minute until there's sufficient time.
Anyone else from the Black Parent Group want to speak to that?
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. So so I guess what, in my opinion, is unique about the the situation in Albany is perhaps, I think Albany has a unique history. And that I really appreciate what Cheryl said, because I'm just gonna, echo, which is that of course Albany is unique, every place is unique, but what is unique about Albany is what we cannot get on the table. And so, we have a past that's marred by exclusionary housing. We have schools that erase our histories and our identities. We have a city that continues to put forth words. If you look at the city council, the website, it literally says, we continue to prioritize our goal to foster an inclusive and equitable community that values our diversity and forward social equity. So this word equity continues to be used. And what I want to really point to is what the word equity means. Equality means every individual or group is given the same resources, but equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances, and it allocates those exact resources so that people can reach an equal outcome. So it's about the outcome. And so I think the circumstances of Albany and the way anti-Blackness shows up in Albany is really critical. So if we look at the covenant in Albany, and I'm literally looking at a document right now that says the amount of Black people allowed in Albany, literally the word says none. And so if we are to address or reckon with that past and look at those documents together and then address those circumstances, we would allocate our resources in a different way, such that the outcome might be different. So what Cheryl is talking about in terms of her experience, Colette is talking about in terms of her experience of showing up at a housing, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's a duck, right? So if we look at our numbers in the city of Albany, which is, demographically, it's 2.98% Black. It is, in terms of Latino or Latinx population in the city of Albany, we have, I actually don't see it on here. And so those numbers would look different if we were really to address and put into practice this word equity. So I think that I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't think we're uniquely not reckoning with our past. I think we're not reckoning with a unique past.
Thank you.
I'm happy to add.
Please.
And first of all, I want to just say I love how the Black Parent Advisory Group is. You're sharing the mic, and there's such richness. So I want to say thank you for that. If I could add to it, which is when I look currently now at the city of Albany, I guess it's the mission statement. When it says that what it strives for is to be fiscally strong and champion a healthy local economy. What it reminds me in the past is that in order to do that, in order to have a green standing rather than a red line standing, it required a 0% of any people of color, and especially Blacks. So there is a history of anti-Black racism as opposed to a neighboring city like Berkeley. So it's right next door, and that acknowledgement is important, that that for fiscal reasons, it justified racism. And if we were to look at how does it inform us now, it's important to be anti-racist, not just be quiet about it. Thanks also to some of the research and history that Council Member Rochelle Nason has brought forth. you know, the Shrine of Freedom basically memorializes men that led to the ousting of Chinese American members to the Albany El Cerrito Exchange Club. It happened probably at the same time. The cross is a reminder to many Black families of alleged lynchings by the KKK. And what I know about it is that actions to remove it has been silenced by what I would call bullies and lawsuits. And then in more recent years, the Instagram blatant racist postings, those feel also like it's been silenced by lawsuits. And so those things, that silence, it absolutely contributes to the current racial climate. I also recently got a copy of the city's draft for a racial equity impact plan. The fact that it seemed like there's a lot of work and there's not even a draft statement that's listed. And I know that it's in the works and it's supposed to be presented in July, but even putting out a draft statement, you know, Target put out a statement, Apple, any products that any of us buy, it was very simple back in July of 2020 to put out a racial equity statement and have a strong stance. So to not be able to even have a draft statement to look at, it feels demoralizing.
Thank you for that. Elizabeth, did you want to weigh in at all? Every panelist doesn't have to weigh in on every question, but I certainly want to give you the opportunity.
Thank you. No, I'm just really listening and taking this all in. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, that segues great well into my next question, and it feels like what was just mentioned might be somewhat on me since I was in elected office in the past year, but you know, can be taken up by the current council or other groups. But my next question was going to be, what are the concrete things or other concrete things that the city, the electeds, the community groups should be doing? How can we be more active, more proactive against racism? And who would like to start? How about we start with, do you have anything you want to add there, Elizabeth? About the concrete steps that we should be taking? Or anyone else, any of the other panelists?
Well, it sounds like some suggestions were made for a statement, for example. I don't know how difficult that is to take place or to happen, or who would be responsible for drafting that statement, but certainly it sounds like that's an important thing to work toward. And so I would, you know, be in support of putting pressure on whatever entity would start to draft something as a beginning. I do think the housing issue sounds very serious and harmful, and there should be, I heard somebody say, there should be some more investigation into seeing what's really happening there. And I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of issues that could be addressed. If I don't know the steps to take, but maybe somebody more informed about community organizations in Albany would have a better sense of what's the first step.
Right. I think maybe it was Colette who mentioned that you know, someone needs to do the study and have the data about all these incidents that are happening. And Karen, Yvette, or Colette, if you're able to still contribute, do you have anything to add about concrete steps?
Well, we just recently really helped students really reclaim their own education by, the diversification of their education with more multicultural books. And, a lot of times we do these things without following up with them, right? Like, how well is it working? As far as, are they getting the needed resources? Are teachers actually using those resources in classroom to lead their teaching so that our histories are being presented authentically in classroom settings? These kind of things, they've been in place. We're creating these programs, but there's also that follow-up on it, right? The continuum programming. So yeah, we got to set up books now, but what are we doing with it? And what is that going to look like 3 years from now? We're going to have the same books. Are we going to also, add to those libraries, add to those resources? So I guess for me, it's just like, if we're going to put things in place, let's monitor the progress and let's start seeing what the impact that it's making on our community. And I'll
Thank
also
you.
yield to, and also it's up to the Black Parent Advisory question.
Any other members of the Black Parent Advisory Group want to weigh in? Concrete steps or other panelists?
It looks like Cheryl has her hand up.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Cheryl, go ahead.
I wasn't, honestly, I was not planning on talking, but however, this one, because it's so close to my heart, I gotta tell you, concrete steps are so easy because and Colette just, again, she alluded to this. Guys, you gotta ask the harmed. If you wanna know how to not offend again, ask the impacted people, ask the people who were harmed. I go back to before. I said before, we haven't reckoned. The city of Albany, this Albany Unified School District has not reckoned with the harm it has caused. It has yet to reckon with the harm it has caused all these children. It's 3 years later, 4 years, 5 years later. Those children graduated 3 years ago. My daughter is about to be a senior in college. But there's something she said to me that is very important. How many of you who have graduates from Albany High love going back to their school? How many of you? They love going back to their school. Those of us who have children who are harmed by Albany Unified School District, they do not like it. They will not set foot back into that school. And that is horrible. It's a horrible thing. It's a horrible feeling for your children to not want to go back to their school. That is because the school has not reckoned. And you know what she said? You know what will make it right? You paid off the children who caused them harm. So the reparations that are due to these children who are harmed, those are concrete steps. We talk about reparations in every other part of society. That's a reparation that's number one. Give them reparations for that. Let them have that kind of solace to let them know that they were valuable and that their spirit, the harm that they were caused is that they were valued and worthy. So that's number one. That's the kind of reparations you owe them, not just some words on a piece of paper that you throw in a drawer or put up on a wall that has no meaning behind it. So you can keep talking about we'll do better in the future, and you have not. You have not done well by the children who are still impacted. I look at some of the words some of these children put in their Instagrams right now, and they're still hurting and they're still harmed because when they were 15, 16 years old, they did not have the tools to deal with it, and we never gave it to them. We never gave it to them. We never worked. I keep working in this district, even though my last baby graduated 3 years ago, because I'm hoping this does not reoccur. But we owe this to them. And we don't only just to the Black and Latino students, which mine are, my children are Black, Latino, and Indigenous. We don't just owe it to them. We owe this to these little white children so that they don't do it again. We owe this to them. We owe this to the Asian children. We owe this to all of them. So if you want to know what to do, be proactive, but also be introspective and fix the harm that was caused. You can't move forward until you fix the harm that was caused. So they owe reparations. Yes, they owe books, but you need to go to the children, the impacted children, the ones who may be impacted later on, and ask them what they need instead of us as adults imposing our will on them and saying what we think they need. Thank you.
Thank you. And you make me think. I smiled for a bit there because you asked about children who would want to go back to the school. My son graduated 4 years from the high school and does really not want to have anything to do with the Albany school system. And I hadn't thought much about it until now. And now I'm going to go ask him some more detailed questions about why. Thank you for raising my awareness about that. But speaking of that, just speaking of concrete steps and the racial incident that happened at the high school, does anyone want to talk more about that? Oh, Gabi, yeah, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
I just wanted to I have something on point to that, to what Cheryl was saying. It kind of reinforces what she was talking about, because my younger daughter just graduated last Friday. And one of the student speakers actually made it a center point of their speech in the graduation by saying that this was the generation that came in the year after that Instagram event happened, and how they were dealing. They were the generation that's, through these years in high school were the ones that were impacted by the fallout from that. And so when Cheryl was talking about the future and the way it impacts the children, it just resonated with what they themselves were saying themselves. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you for that. So we had an Instagram racial incident at the high school. The high school tried to have some sort of process. I believe it did not go well, and the high school was sued and had to settle about that process. Does any of the other panelists have any thoughts about that incident and what we should do about it or going forward?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Cheryl, for all that you've just said. And I also agree that that incident, it impacted all of us. And maybe it was from my privileged place that I was even shocked that it happened. And I shouldn't have been shocked. But there is a cost when we don't acknowledge those things. I mean, it basically was literally swept under the rug. And like Cheryl was saying, my understanding is the perpetrators were paid with this idea of freedom of speech, right? So here you are, you're the Albany Democratic Club. Like, to me, the principles of democracy, there's a moral case for speaking out. And so when we're silent, it really pains me. And maybe I can also just answer your question too, which is, we all have grown up in a biased society. So all of us are racist. All of us are biased. But then us not acknowledging and not speaking about that to me is what I would call white dominant culture. Based on like Puritan history or whatever. It's like it's just shoved under the rug and we're expected to forget. And so it's very painful. And what I might say for, I think your question was with the city council leaders or the school board leaders here, and maybe even the city leaders, the staff, you know, what I would ask is, you know, as it relates to this, the city mission and vision to respond to the needs of diverse and engaged communities, that we really operate from a principle of building community belonging. And what that means is that we would make sure that all members of society in Albany, especially that 2.98% of Black residents, that they would feel like they're truly listened to, that they're truly considered, regardless of their skin color. And, you know, if I can just say something about, and this is it all in due respect, you know, with the city council meetings, sometimes I see this, that if there's a member of the public, or if a city council member isn't saying things with what I would call like the unspoken norms and rules that you would know of based on a white dominant society, they are not heard as well. And instead, what I would like to ask these city and school board leaders is, as advocates, I hope you would actually pay more attention, because it's those people that aren't listened to. They are the ones that need to be listened to the most.
Thank you for that. Having been an elected, can you maybe give me more of an idea about how that manifests itself? Whether are these folks are cut off, or they're just ideas are not addressed in the discussion going forward? Is that sort of the manifestation of that, or how do we recognize that happening? Yvette?
I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi just cut out for a minute, so I didn't hear.
Oh, my question was, thank you for bringing that to our attention. Can you talk more about how you see that manifesting? You know, how do people not, how are maybe some people not recognized as well by the elected bodies? Is it that they get cut off, or that their ideas are not discussed? Or can you give us some concrete things to look out for?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a member of the Community Task Force on Policing. And on Tuesday, I found out from one of the members who spoke that there's been at least 2 different commissions or task forces where they made recommendations to the city council, and then at the end, you know, my understanding is a city staff person or somebody added an additional recommendation, and then that was the one that got voted on for the city council. I think that was related to housing. And so while on the city website, it talks about wanting engaged community members, you know, it seems like this is the main reason why you wouldn't get that kind of civic engagement if there isn't the transparency, or if there isn't if people don't feel like their effort is going to be heard. And I'm saying this just because I heard this for the first time and it surprised me. But that's an example.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anyone else want to speak to that, the community members not being heard, and/or to the Instagram incident?
I wanted to just kind of piggyback on some of the comments that have been made so far in terms of I've often thought about what would a Truth and Reconciliation Commission look like in the city of Albany. you know, we actually may not have a cross on our hill if we were to really listen to people's experiences, and especially Black people's experiences in this city. We might listen to a truth like that and realize, how do we make an experience like that right? Well, one of the things we need to do is to do whatever we can to remove the cross. And so, you know, I hear it's just, I guess, so far what people have said, I think, you know, even listening to what Cheryl is saying, you know, so what would that look like to have young people who were, you know, who experienced the Instagram, tell their stories, and what could it look like to listen to those stories and then create actions based on a recognition and a restoration. And so, you know, as a classroom teacher, you know, we do a lot in our classrooms around restorative practices. There's a whole field of restorative justice, and what that field tells us to do with young people in particular, as well as communities, it says, let's take a look at the harm and let's face the harm that has taken place, and then let us create actions that are appropriate to the harm that has taken place. So there's, you know, a whole variety of instances of that. For example, you know, if you're a classroom teacher and you know, there's a fight, it isn't just a fight between two kids, it's a fight that a lot of other kids have witnessed. If there are apologies to the entire classroom and community. And so, so I would, you know, in terms of a concrete step, I mean, let's talk about listening to, in particular, the way anti-Blackness shows up in the city of Albany. Well, let's listen to our Black residents, and let's design actions based on those stories that address and bear witness to those stories, and then say, what is it that we can do as a collective to honestly and truthfully face that truth and not shy away from it? You know, I mean, again, these racial covenants that say about housing, I mean, this entire wealth of this community is built on this exclusion. When can we face that and then take some action on that, instead of sort of, oh, I don't, you know, whoever's moving in here is just who moves in here. I mean, we leave it up to the market, you know, or we leave it up to sort of capitalism. We will continue to see this 2.8%. But if we're ever to say, this happened and we need to do something about this, we might actually begin to work as a collective. And white folks, you know, Asian folks, Latinos, Black folks, all of us together to say, this really happened, and this is what we really need to do right now to address what really happened. Because I feel like without that, we continue to say, you know, we continue to just sort of let what happens happen. And we're continuing to see the fruits of that.
You know, I think I've heard that before. At least part of what you said is it's not enough to say, you know, we welcome people here, but actually to encourage people, the people we want to see here, the people of color, to encourage them to come to Albany and to help them make, you know, allow them to come, if you will, help them do that. So, yeah, thank you for that. So the Community Task Force on Policing was mentioned. I did want to touch on that. I wanted to ask our panelists if they think that the Community Task Force on Policing is, or have they started out on the right track? Are there any things that task force should do or should not do? Any pitfalls to avoid? And what would be the best outcome of that task force? Anyone want to take that?
I can start since I'm a member.
Please.
Well, the charge of the task force on policing is to examine policies and practices of the police that have negatively impacted the community members. And then more broadly, develop recommendations for the city council to consider. I think one important point to note is that B 953 is the racial I'm sorry, I'm forgetting what the I stands for, but profiling. Oops, let me back it. I'm sorry.
You're back. Go ahead.
I'm not sure where I was. What did you hear, if anything? I'm sorry.
I think you started to talk about the charter or the task, the mission of the task force, and you started to go into detail. I think that's where we lost you.
Okay, I'm gonna actually walk closer to the router.
Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Maybe you can hear me better.
You're fine now. Go ahead.
Okay. The charge of the task force on policing is to examine policies and practices of the police that have negatively impacted community members, and then more broadly, develop recommendations for the city council to consider. I really hope that the city council will really hear the recommendations from this group in terms of looking at, you know, the broader question of reimagining public safety, looking at even specifically how did the, you know, Reagan era elimination of mental health hospitals and institutions, how does it really impact as we look at you know, criminal activities or housing or mental health service, you know, all of those things. It all impacts Albany, even though it might have been a state's decision. I think another point that's important is that AB 953, which stands for RIPA, it's the Racial Profiling Act. It requires that all law enforcement agencies collect data to make police accountable. And the police department, because it's quite small, is not obligated to collect that data until 2023. But what I would argue is that if the city is taking an anti-racist lens, it would want to collect that data sooner and be accountable and be in early compliance with the law. And just to more broadly look at, this isn't about like good people, bad people, good police, not good, you know, the police itself is, you know, the institution of policing has a racist history. And that research has shown that whether you do training, whether you hire officers of color, it doesn't change that implicit bias. So that's what I would say for now.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else, any other panelists want to speak on the Community Task Force on Policing? If not, I think we can just, I'm almost out of my canned questions, but it's already past 8 and I want to make sure that we get the audience questions and or audience comments or feedback as well. So why don't I just go ahead and open it up to anyone to speak, and please go ahead and raise your hand so I can, if you're able, or if you're not, just shout out that you're, you know, for some reason you're not able to raise your hand. And we'll just start to make this more of a dialogue for the next few minutes. I think there was one person who might want to speak. Julie, were you requesting to speak, or were you just asking if we were going to have a dialogue?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
How did you know it was me and not David? You just guessed.
It actually says David Danby and Julie.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I did assume it was you.
Right.
Pardon.
Yeah, I'm so used to people knowing it's me, even though it usually just says David. I do have a question. I think that what I would like to see in Albany is more anti-racist work. And I think one of the ways that you could do anti-racist work would be if the Albany Democratic Club were to endorse people of color. I looked at your list of endorsements. It's pretty dismaying if you take a look and see who's been endorsed. So I would encourage the club to do, the Democratic Club to do that, and to really put that, and to consider that even though you may have a lot of expertise or a lot of political aspirations or political experience, to nonetheless move back and leave space for people of color. And I think that's one way that we could look more welcoming as a city, is if somebody doesn't come to the city council and see all of these white people, or see the city manager is white and the assistant manager is white. And I think if we could change the look of the city, who's on the commissions, who's on the council, who's on the school board. I know the school board has gotten better. Then that's another way of it looking like a welcoming place. So I would encourage all of you to leave space, and that would be an anti-racist act. And I think that's how you are anti-racist, is by actually doing something active. So it's not really a question, I guess. I could ask why. Here's my question: why did you not endorse? Why did you not endorse a city council person of color in the last election, and why did you not endorse Keith Carson in the last election? That's my question.
Don't want to get into that too much, but it was a vote. But your point is well taken, and we'll take that back to the group for further discussion, definitely. But those are the results of votes by the membership.
Can I say something about that?
Please.
Yeah, I did want to touch on representation, because representation is so critical. It is a way, I think that it really relates to a lot of the things that people are talking about here tonight. So representation in our city, representation in our schools, as part of Familias Latinas de Albany. Some of the conversations we've been having is around having more Latino teachers in our school district. And I'm sure the Black parent group also is concerned about the amount of Black teachers, because representation is so important. I will say that in our, if we're going to, earlier you all had asked, like, what can we do? And one of the things that came out in one of Mayor Gary's recommendations or ordinances or resolutions around Juneteenth was she was able to collect demographic information on supervisors, managers, department heads for the city of Albany, and 84% of those people are white. So this is, again, representation is critical, and listening is critical, and working with people of color. And this is what people continue to say. So I would love to see, in terms of real concrete actions, I would love to see a lot more work happening in this city around supporting the representation that is here, listening to, our elected officials that are people of color, and working directly with moving the agenda that those folks are working on.
Yeah, thank you for that. And by the way, I do want to mention that we would love diverse representation on the club itself. I'm a little embarrassed to say the officers are 5 white men and an Asian woman. So please, if you want to get more involved in the club, we welcome you. So I'm going to start calling folks who've raised their hand in order that they've raised their hand, but panelists, feel free to also jump in and answer questions as they come up. So Margie, you're next. If you're able to unmute.
I'm so sorry. Thank you for doing this presentation. Several people have mentioned that the Black population of Albany is less than 3%. In 2015, when they did the housing element, it was 4%. So we've lost Black population. And that's very disturbing to me. One of the things, I know this is a really small thing, but you know, if we had a Black Lives Matter in Albany on the Ohlone Trail, you know, near Solano, I think that that could be a symbol. And I realize it's just words and it's just a symbol, but it would be a message. I mean, when George Floyd died, there was a lot of action, and you know, people wanted Black Lives Matter signs put up. Well, Albany, you know, we're going through some big process to do it, and it's like just paint it on the Greenway. There's a group of citizens that would do a GoFundMe campaign to get it done, and I would like to get that done. So I'm concerned about Black Lives Matter. When I was on the SEJC, I was part of a listening session with some about 25 Black and brown students from the high school. And they mentioned that when they go to shops on Solano, they get micro and macro aggressions that they feel against them because of their color. If we could have training for proprietors who own shops on Solano, and they could put up a sign in the window that says, "We welcome people of all colors here. You know, we want you to be here in Albany." I would just like us to do more. I know it's just symbolism and it's just words, but I would like to see more of that in Albany to make it, you know, at least look like it's a more welcoming place. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up we have, I think it's Dora or Gerardo Rios. Oh, it's Gerardo.
Hi. First I wanted to say thank you for having this discussion. It's really great to know that at least we're starting to really talk about this issue. It's big, it's important, and it has never really gotten a lot of attention. I also wanted to underscore something that was said earlier about the legislature of not, or regulation. I think it was something about the city having something that said no people of color or Black people were allowed in the past, and that has not been removed. I think that's really important, even if it's, you know, symbolic to some people. It's very important if we actually do something to remove that language. And let me tell you something. When I first moved to Albany, I am a homeowner here. I think there was somebody that owned this house temporarily. They lost it during the housing market. And before that, there was only one owner. As a result, when I received the deed, I received a copy of the original deed for this house. And what did I read in that deed? It said, no person of color is allowed to own this property, and they are not allowed to live here unless they are servants of the white person that owns it. When I read that, you know, that's pretty heavy. That told me something about the redlining that occurs here, or that historically has occurred here. You know, and then I learned more about the history of Albany, the cross, the headquarters for the KKK just down the street on Solano Avenue. Yes, they've moved out, but you know, it feels like, well, the city is trying to be very progressive, about not having that past, we have to acknowledge it. And I don't really see that actually happening. And if we don't do something to really recognize what has been there, what's underlying the city, the inequity that has occurred here, to basically keep people out, keep them from accumulating wealth, we're not going to really move forward. To me, it's the same issue as drug addiction. If you don't acknowledge the drug addiction, you're not going to start addressing the issue because you're not acknowledging that it even exists. So I really want to underscore, you want to do something meaningful, let's start with the basics. I do agree with everything else that was said about what we could do, but we should start with those basic things. Let's remove anything, any legislature or law, even if it's, or charter, that has any language that was historically there that impeded the participation of people of color. That'll be a really good start. And that will tell everyone that they are welcome, because we no longer tolerate that kind of language in our regulations, in our charters, in our policies or practices. I just wanted to say that, and thank you again for having this this forum. I think it was really important and it was really enlightening to hear. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you for those words, and seeing that those words in your deed to the house. Wow, that's amazing. It's terrible. Sorry, did I cut off someone who was going to say something?
I guess if I may add, I wonder how many other people have actually looked closely enough at their deeds to see that language. I remember I did hear on the radio, probably not on the radio, probably some talk show somewhere recently, that talked about somebody having similar language. It was in another city. The problem is when they received the new deed, that had not been removed, and he had to go through a lot of legal recourse to actually get that language removed. I was,
wow.
So it's important, and I wonder how many people, I encourage you to look at your own deed, just to see that if that language still exists, it's something that was shocking to me, but shouldn't have been. It's not surprising knowing the history of the whole Bay Area. But take a look, see if it's still there. And it might be an important thing for you to help you recognize what, just one of the hurdles that people of color actually have to deal with.
Is that something, sorry to jump in, is that something, is that like you go on the county website and you type in an address or something and you can see it online, or do you know how people find that?
If you receive a copy of the deed when you bought your house, you should be able to see it.
It'd be in those initial stack of papers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, yeah. Those of us who are fortunate to own property would do as well to look for that. Yeah, thank you for that. And let's see. So we are running close to the time we thought we would stop. I don't want to end the discussion prematurely, but I'll say that we're going to try to end it around 8:30. And we don't. It's not hard and fast, but we will. And as I said before, we also will have more of these. The next one I want to schedule for September, and then we have next Cheryl with her hand up. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Nick. You know what? I was taking some notes here because I wanted to make sure since Colette had to leave, I just want to make sure I touch a few things. There was a couple questions you asked. You asked about the city council meetings, how an elected person can make sure that they're not inadvertently being discriminatory. For those of you who don't know, I am the president of the West County Wastewater Board of Directors. I'm also elected to that position. I'm also elected to the West County Agency. And I was vice chair this morning. I was elected as chair of that agency. And there's a couple things that I'm very conscious of myself, but that sometimes people are not conscious of. And I've seen it at these Albany city council meetings as well as the school board meetings, cutting people off. And it was just said. And so I think it's paying attention to what you do when someone doesn't say a point of view that you agree with is very important, because it happens all the time. And Miss Yvette just kind of said this, and I've seen it at many of these meetings, is that when someone says something that you don't agree with, his body language, his eyes rolled, he's getting cut off, he's enforcing the 2 or 3 minutes rule, he's letting that buzzer buzz over someone speaking rather than letting them finish their sentence, where someone else who's saying something that you agree with, boy, you let them go on and on and on. It's things like that. And it's the difference between what Ms. Karen just told you, equity and equality. When you're speaking on a subject, or when there is a subject where the community has a lot of passion and input, as what happened a couple of years ago, when there was a lot of harmed individuals from that Instagram incident, and you guys cut the time down. You cut the time down to like 90 seconds. Our children were harmed and hurting, and you didn't want to hear the parents or the children's voices. So if you want to know what not to do, don't do that. You do not do that. It was like a stab in the eye. And as a parent of one of those children, it is unforgivable. It's unforgettable. We may forgive you, but it's unforgettable. There is an African proverb that says, the tree remembers what the axe forgets. The tree remembers what the axe forgets. So when you talk about race, you talk about racism, you can throw around all of these big words about being anti-racist and all of that. It sounds really good on a poster. But those of us who walk in this skin that's kissed by the sun, it doesn't wash off. It doesn't wash off. Those of us who've lived our lives as Blacks and Latinos and Indigenous people, it doesn't wash off. So I'm telling you that things like when we're talking about othering and belonging, these aren't taglines. We know what it feels like to walk in a neighborhood. When I've seen people come into Albany and try and transfer their children into this district and be told that they're not wanted. You want to change something? Get rid of that stupid policy. So thank you for saying what you just said, Brother Gerardo, but it's not just in the housing. It is in the policies of Albany not to accept but a small number of Black and brown students in transfer. But I have seen white students get accepted from everywhere around this East Bay area. But they will not accept Black and brown students, but a certain number. So let's not pretend that he's only dealing with housing. Let's say that this is in the total fabric of Albany. I've heard parents say, but I don't want it to bring down the school district, as if it is a given that a Black student or a brown student, a Latino student is not as intelligent as a white student. My daughter graduated Albany High at 16. My son's 17. 2 more house students and a daughter who's getting ready at 19 to finish at St. Mary's and head to medical school. But you guys, and I'm not saying you personally, this white community has them tagged before they even come in. So you want to talk racism? Let's get real. Stop this surface talking and passing proclamations and walking around with banners. Talk real. And that requires what I think it was Miss Yvette who just said, and it was Miss Margie just said, sometimes you got to step aside and sit to the back. Make space. Make space for other people to have a chance. Sometimes that means that maybe your child is not the one because they are not qualified. Stop making phone calls and giving your child favors over the one who is qualified. I've seen it happen. I've seen teachers at Albany High write letters of recommendation to a substandard student to take that place at UC Berkeley of another student who is well qualified, and they don't get in because you guys have stolen that seat from another child who is qualified. So you want to know what you can do? Stop doing that. Stop backhanding. Stop city council writing letters for students. Stop giving scholarships to students who don't deserve it, because you have the power to write those recommendations. You have the power to write these letters and give these scholarships away. Stop. What else can you do? You can stop pretending that everything is okay. You can stop pretending that you have never done anything wrong. Look at yourselves and figure out how you can be better. You can't be better until you can do some introspection and say, you know what? I've done that. I've done that, and I can apologize for it, but I need to make things right. Every one of us can do that. Every one of us can do that. But some of you have been integral in the oppression of other people. And you know it. And you know it. And just because you can sign up for a Democratic Club and say that you are now part of what do you call this, liberal establishment does not make it go away. It cannot go away until you make restitution for what you have done. So let's come up with a way that where you can recognize what you have done, you can fix it and then move forward. But you can't move forward until you make sure of that. One of my favorite quotes from James Baldwin is, "We can disagree and still love each other. Unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist." And that is what we face in Albany. That is what we face here. Because you're okay with me existing, you're okay as a Black woman, as a Latina, as an Indigenous woman, as a Muslim woman, as long as it doesn't inconvenience you. As long as it doesn't inconvenience you or cause you to have to recognize that sense that Ms. Karen said of equity and rather than equality. And once we get there, we can move on. That is what we're talking about. And I
Thank you, Cheryl.
to have that real conversation. So if part 2 is real like that, I'll invite more people to come.
Yeah, let's make it real. Thank you, Cheryl. Powerful words. So we're a little over time, but I want to see if I can, if any of the panelists who are still here or members of the Black Parent Advisory Group have any quick final words they want to say before we move on. Anyone? Well, going once, going twice. If not, I want to thank all the panelists, Colette West of the Black Parent Advisory Group and all the other members of the Black Parent Advisory Group, and Karen and Yvette of Albany Speaks Out. And if you have any, and I think Elizabeth, who left, of the Jewish Advisory Group, Jewish Parents Engagement Group. If you have any links you want to put in the chat for how we can learn more about these groups or get connected with these groups, that would be great. Otherwise, I think we will, I think we're over time, so we'll move on. But yeah, we will have more of these, and let's make it real. Yeah, let's keep it real. And Cheryl, you know, take me to task. Let's talk. All right. Thanks again, and we'll move on to the next segment of our meeting. Oh, and by the way, before the mayor goes away, she will be our next speaker at our July meeting. Will be Mayor Gary and her priorities. So do please come back for that. And everyone is welcome to stay for the next part of the meeting, where we're just going to have a round table with any electeds or appointeds who want to talk about things going on in Albany. So thanks again to everyone who participated in this discussion and to the panelists, and we'll move on to our next section. All right. Our next section is a time for people on committees, commissions, and city council, and any residents to share what's going on around town, what's happened, what's coming up, and other meetings. Would anyone like to start? I'm gonna call on Brian, because I know he's on a committee or commission, right?
Yeah, and we're also eager to hear from other people on the call to hear what they know about what's going on around town. I'll start with, I'm on the Parks and Rec Commission, and we are working on our Parks Master Plan, and that will guide our decisions going forward as to what we do in the parks and how we do it. And in particular, immediately, there's Prop 68 funds that passed, gosh, like 3 years ago or something, are finally being released to the city, and it's several $100,000, and those need to be decided on this year. So as soon as the master plan is done in the early fall, we will be making recommendations on how those funds are spent. The city council will make final decisions, and so people should be. Our July meeting is going to be all about the Parks Master Plan, and so public input is very welcome from all perspectives as to how you want to see things done, and changes, improvements, et cetera, et cetera. Also, there was a very concerning meeting that came up in May. We had having to do with fire risk on the Albany Hill, and that has also come before the city council. And so that's something to be looking for as the fire season is starting so much earlier this year. The eucalyptus trees appear to be in bad shape, and more studies are being done. And so stay tuned on that as well. There may need to be some, so yeah, just to be aware of that going on. I did mention in the chat, if people saw it or not, that the Parks Commission, part of the master plan is to have these consultants do an inventory of honors and memorials around town. And once that's done, then part of what Parks and City Council will be doing is looking at how memorials and honors are handled in general, but also at specific honors and memorials from the past. And also, what people want honors and memorials to look like for the future. So that's another way to get engaged in what's going on there. And that's my update.
Thanks, Brian. I'll go ahead and jump in. I'm a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and we have a very meaty year. Two big things on our agenda are the San Pablo Avenue specific plan, where we're trying to jumpstart development, especially development of housing, needed housing on that corridor where it has a lot of possibilities, a lot of underutilized land to put housing on. So that's coming up at our next meeting next week, next Wednesday. We also will be talking about the housing element, which is something that the city has to do, a state mandated document that the city has to do periodically. And we are being asked by the regional group to accommodate a lot more housing in Albany. So we will be having to figure out how we do that. Changes in zoning. Certainly, Albany's the San Pablo Avenue specific plan will feed into that, but that's also going to be a very important discussion given how much the housing crisis that we still have, and how the landscape is changing in terms of zoning, especially single family zoning, et cetera. So yeah, San Pablo Avenue next meeting. And who else? We do have a quorum of the city council here, but I don't know if that means that they can't speak to factual events that have happened or not. So if a council member feels like they can just say some statements of what has happened or what's happening, that's fine. If they feel like that's a little not good territory. Preston, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, so sticking to that territory, and thank you for recognizing we have a quorum here. So for any who are on the line and don't know, state law precludes a quorum of any government body from having discussions about policy going forward or any items going forward. And the reason for that is so that the public has access to those conversations in a publicly noticed meeting, which this is not. So sticking to facts, following up on what Brian said, the situation with Albany Hill and the eucalyptus trees to come before the council. The city and researchers are pursuing, I guess, 3 tracks on that. And one of the other council members can elaborate if I get this wrong. One of the tracks that the city is contracting for a fuel load survey that also, is sensitive to the monarch butterfly habitat. Some of the trees up there are roosting trees for monarch butterflies. So this will be done in as low impact a manner as possible using drone technology. We've hired the biological consultant who did the monarch butterfly habitat analysis previously, and then also UC extension. Actually, it's not extension. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name. There's some part of UC that I've never heard of before, which is strange because I work for UC. That will be participating in that, and so that'll be coming up in the next month or so. There are researchers from UC, a professor at UC who's an expert on tree diseases, tree mortality, and particularly sudden oak death, along with a researcher from USDA, US Forest Service, and CAL FIRE that have taken a particular interest in what is happening with eucalyptus and acacia species throughout the East Bay. And they applied for and got approval to cut down a trunk of 4 multi-trunked eucalyptus trees on the hill so that they could take samples to bring back to the lab and try to analyze if there are pathogens that are in part responsible for what is occurring to the trees. And so that's the second track. The third track is staff is researching the essentially development agreements, deeds, titles. I'm not sure what the legal instrument is, but most of the west side of Albany Hill is privately owned. It's privately owned open space that's owned by the condominium associations. And so the city staff is looking into those documents to determine what, if any, obligation they have to reduce fire risk on their property. So there's other items, but I've spoken to that one, hopefully somewhat thoroughly. So I'll leave it open for one of the other council members to go into another item if they like.
And I apologize if I missed it, but I noticed Mayor Gary had her hand up, but now she seems to have left. So I apologize if I did not see her hand before you unmuted there, Preston. In any case, she's not here anymore. Would any other council member like to give any status updates or statements of fact?
Thank you to Preston for going first as per usual and remembering things more factually than I could have hoped. To hopefully get what Mayor Gary was maybe going to mention, I'd just like to plug again her Juneteenth event on Saturday, which I believe is, which he got a permit for at one of our council meetings and has mentioned a couple times, which is going to be going all day. and have some good events. And I think the city has sent out an email about. Other than that, I think Preston hit all the major points, though we have another council member here if they want to touch on anything else.
Nope, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay.
I had
Yeah,
a request
and
for I had a request for a council member to summarize what was said at a well, one thing that came up in the meeting was the cross on Albany Hill. Several people brought that up, and the city had an announcement about that of some things in the works. And does anyone care to try to summarize what was announced? Is in the
Yeah,
works?
so you're being a great straight person. Thanks, Brian. So I was gonna jump back in on that. Even though other council member raised that, so that what was announced was that the city council has authorized an assessment of the value of the maintenance easement for the cross on the hill, which that's all the easement consists of, is a easement to allow access across the city property to be able to maintain the cross. And then based on that valuation to negotiate with the Lions for the purchase of that easement. So that's the status of that. That's really all I can say about it. I think I should also mention that the council approved the biennial budget. This is the budget for the next 2 fiscal years, which starts July 1st. And certainly that budget can be amended as policy changes, if it changes over that time period. So it's not that it's locked in place, but it has been approved. And yeah, maybe that I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. I think I might have forgotten to recognize Council Member Rochelle Nason previously, and if I did, apologies for that. And I want to recognize that she, I believe, was on most of the meeting, if not all of it. And yeah, let's not forget about the Juneteenth celebration. There you go. Anyone else?
Well, Juneteenth, I hope.
Yeah. Anyone? Yeah. And anyone else? Let's see, Gabi, you're not currently on a commissioner. Any other goings around? Any other goings on around town at all that anyone wants us to know about? Oh, while you're thinking about that, I will say I do see the Susan Moffett on, and I completed the the Monument to Extraction tour that was set up by the UC Berkeley students out in the bulb, and I didn't realize that Susan was behind that. And that was pretty awesome. Took a little, technical manipulation beforehand to get the sound, get the thing on my phone, but I walked through it, and I recommend it to everyone as something to go do. You'll probably learn something. And I think it's Signe has her hand up. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Yes, that's fine. I just want to bring up the Gill Tract Community Farm and remind you guys that we have our farm stand every Sunday from 3 to 5. And we're still distributing a lot of food to people with food insecurity. And we're also going to be starting some short courses. So I should get something in print, I guess, to send to you perhaps, so you can know what some of the resources that are being offered and about to be offered. So thank you.
Thank you for that.
I wanted to mention, if you people don't get on the Facebook group or whatever, but the Albany Coachella it has another, I think it's 5th incarnation, and so that's coming up. My wife's in a band in our neighborhood, so we always look forward to that and walking around, and so that's the last weekend in June.
Oh, that's good news. I thought they weren't going to do one since the state had opened up, so I'm happy to hear that they are doing one. Great. And going once, yeah, Susan points out that the tour covers on the bulb covers a lot of things, including racial history and segregation, and so that's where I learned about the white flight from the public housing where the UC student housing is now in Albany. Well, all right. Well, thanks everyone. This was great. Look forward to the next one, and the discussion will go on.
Thanks for putting this
Take
together.
care.
Mike.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks all.
Thank you for coming. Take care.
You guys.
Bye-bye. Good night, Neil.
Bye.